So, hello everybody. I just watched a very interesting video on race and orthodoxy by Nikolai of Korea, or Nikolai in Korea. I'm sorry. I've interacted with this guy before. He's a very level-headed, uh, intelligent, nice guy. I think he's very goodwill. So I wanted you to show you his thought process and maybe offer counterpoints to what he's saying. So let's jump into the video. So let's.
Hey guys, Nikolai Korea here back at you with another video. This time we're going to be doing the very highly anticipated and interesting topic that is the race and orthodoxy video. Now, this is not an exhaustive treatise of every aspect of my thoughts on race. This is to give you a general overview of what I think about it and where I think race and orthodoxy intersects and where I think it doesn't intersect. If you want me to give robust argumentation for every little dot and tittle of my thoughts on an issue, that's just not going to be possible without making this like a 4-part, 5-hour series, right? So we're going to try and keep this relatively short. And there is a script, so if I fumble through the script a little bit, forgive me. But here we go. So what is race and what, if anything, has to do with orthodoxy in the Christian faith in the modern world, and conversations about identity are huge right now. We see this in particularly, though, the United States of America. The United States seems to have a very unique relationship with race in a way that is almost entirely removed, and in terms of like anxiety surrounding race, that's almost entirely removed from kind of the rest of the context of the world. It is very often something that is considered a major issue that is constantly talked about and is constantly being thrown around, particularly among Americans. But when we look at the rest of the world, it's far less of a contentious issue in the same way. That's not to say there is zero contention about it, but it's to say that there is less contention about it. So today we're going to explore that relationship, or perhaps a lack thereof, between race and Eastern Orthodoxy. So I'm going to start with kind of breaking down the general idea of it all. So my first kind of thought is race is often a vague and not even useful term. Let's think about it. What exactly makes someone white, black, Asian, etc.? The lines are never quite set in stone. They change throughout history, and from one person to the next, you will get a completely different answer. Is a person from North Africa white? What about someone from the Middle East? Ask 10 different people, and you'll often get almost 10 different answers, unless they're in the same like niche, hyper niche group that hyper define things. But even then, that's not what the average person is really all that we all that care about. And so, as a result, your term has become basically meaningless or useless, because if it's not applicable to the average person and the average understanding of that thing, it's quickly dismissed. So when we look at these things, not only can they change throughout history, and oftentimes race as even a concept wasn't even fully understood historically, but it just kind of begs the question: who sets the standard for what X is, right? So some people say, well, they look similar to XYZ person. They look similar. A German looks similar to a French, and French looks similar to Spain, and Spain looks similar to some.
I'm sorry, Nikolai. Already we're smuggling in a lot of, let's say, enlightenment categories of thought. I would have to say that it's not about, let's say, perceived phenotypical similarities, but about history. So if you had to speak about race, you'd have to immediately, if you were approaching it from an Orthodox perspective, think about St. Maximus, think about logoi, think about, let's say, ontological categories as fundamentally real. So in the way you're framing it is already very biased towards, let's say, cultural relativism, and thinking that it's kind of like an ad hoc, arbitrary, nominalist invention. So let's move forward.
Moroccans, but not all Moroccans, but some Moroccans. And then, a Romanian might look similar to a Georgian, but a Georgian might look semi-similar to an Azerbaijanian, right? But an Azerbaijanian might not look the same as a Romanian, right? So the standards get very muddled very quickly, and it very much becomes an intangible thing. So this is why I think ethnicity is a better metric to be measuring against. An ethnic group is defined by shared culture, language, history, and often religion, but also blood ties. Okay, the boundaries are much clearer. You can either share in Greek, Russian, Serbian, or Ethiopian culture, historical traditions, or you do not, including bloodline. You can know, am I related to Ethiopians? Well, my parents were Ethiopian, their parents were Ethiopian, and their parents' parents were Ethiopian. Right? Like it's very easy to understand who qualifies as Ethiopian. It's also we're able to measure these things on some level to a genetic degree. So I think that's an important thing to understand as well. It's about a tangible heritage, not ambiguous appearance, because to some people, an Ethiopian right here might look very similar to a Gabonian, right? But frankly, you couldn't get more distinct in terms of culture, right? A person from Sierra Leone here or Burkina Faso is going to be very different culturally, ethnically, and even in terms of genetics, much different than an Ethiopian in many ways. So it's completely arbitrary in a lot of ways, and that causes many problems. Furthermore, borders and people groups shift and move as time goes on. So that is a very important thing to keep in mind. Sometimes the distinction between two groups of people, like Sudan and South Sudan, are simply religion. And so borders and being close to somebody doesn't necessitate that they are either genetically close or genetically distinct.
Okay, now I'm understanding exactly what he's doing here. He's trying to, let's say, speak against the concept of race as it's been, let's say, propagated in the US, which I definitely agree with him. Like saying black or saying white is kind of too vague in a sense. But at the same time, there is some truth in that. Just because you want to be nitpicky about it kind of detracts from the, let's say, utility of the concept and the reality of the concept. Just saying because, like, oh, a person from France is very different from a person from, I don't know, Germany, even though they even might share a lot of DNA, uh, is kind of modeling the very same kind of tool that you're trying to use, which is blood ties. In fact, I would say that the French and the Germans are very closely related genetically, and what makes them different is their history, mostly, right? Although I'm not interested in being super nitpicky, I'm just trying to, let's say, attack the philosophical, let's say, presuppositions behind the attempt at completely erasing or making the concept of race as it's being used in the US even poorly, uh, because I don't think it's useless. I don't think it's useless. I think it's a good shorthand, and that it does reflect ontological realities.
So it becomes very difficult to do that. This leads me to kind of my second point. Of the most important things one can identify with, race is on the lower end of importance from the Orthodox paradigm. What defines you? Are you a beloved child of God created in his image? Are you a member of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church? Are you a husband, a wife, a father, a mother, a friend? Are you a citizen of your nation? These are all identities with
Well, are you a citizen of your nation is exactly that question. Like, who's your people? Like, being a citizen of your nation is your race. Like, you're trying to, like, put these two concepts in a dialectic when they're not dialectical. They're actually completely related. So I'm gonna give you a practical example. Yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine who's Orthodox, and he was asking me if I would marry a Russian woman, because he's a person who's like super racist, let's say. He wants ethnic purity and such, and the idea that he uses in terms of like maintaining racial purity is this vague concept of whiteness, which I don't fully agree with, but at the same time, I think it's an honest and interesting conversation to have, right? I'm from Argentina. I'm from mixed stock, by the way. I'm a quarter Hungarian, a quarter Spanish, and half Armenian. So, and even then, I don't think I'm quite pure in each of these groups if you drill down to it. And I think what takes precedence is the cultural aspect. I'm from Argentina. My country is a country that was, let's say, built on Enlightenment foundations, and that is, let's say, multi-ethnic in that melting pot kind of way. Like, so I would say that I have an ethnicity that is an amalgamation. I'm from a nation that is built of different nations, right? So I am Argentinian. It's not that being Argentinian is this, let's say, lie or illusion. I am Argentinian. I'm culturally Argentinian, and now I'm an immigrant living in Spain. And Spain has a completely different culture, completely different. And I don't feel like I've come home back to my motherland. I feel like I'm an immigrant in a foreign land. So, what I was telling my friend was, look, I'm Orthodox. I try to be as Orthodox as I can be. Being Orthodox as I can be means that I'm against what NATO is doing. I'm against the persecution of the Ukrainian church that is going on right now. It means that I neither support nor criticize Putin. Like, I don't think that he's a bad ruler for his people. I don't think he's the devil. I think that a Russian, a true Russian, let's take my perspective out of it. A true Russian would stand by their leader, right? A true Russian would be pro Putin, right? So a true Russian would also stay in Russia. They would not flee because they don't like Putin. They wouldn't flee because of the war, right? So the only kind of woman that I would be able to meet realistically living in Spain that came from Russia would be a specific sector of the population. So this already should give you a hint to a sociological reality, which is there is a center and there are margins. The people in the center, the true, let's say, Russians, they wouldn't leave Russia. Why would they? Right? Uh, the only way for you to meet the aristocracy of another country is either you going to that country, you being part of an aristocracy and being in a diplomatic context, or that country being destroyed. Like, for example, Venezuela. Like, you could meet the aristocracy from Venezuela in Spain, right? Because their country has completely been wiped off, and they use their money, right? Like they're the aristocracy in exile. But what I mean to say with all of this is when he asked me if I would marry a Russian woman, it's kind of a misnomer because he's thinking about it from a very romantic perspective where I'm like, I'm going to meet this like Russian princess here in Spain when that Russian princess has no let's say incentive to go outside of her home, right? Why would she leave her homeland? It that betrays a kind of, let's say, modernistic and immature liberal kind of mindset where um, in reality geographic distances do not reflect cultural and ethnic differences and social structures. It's like there is a certain gravity to every single nation, and that's why it remains a nation. And if you do not understand it, then you're not able to defend nationhood as such. So that's why race comes into the national conversation. Because the reason why I told my friend is not that I have a prejudice against Russian women. I would love to marry a Russian princess. Why wouldn't I? Like, of course, but I don't have access to that Russian princess because living in Madrid as an immigrant means that the Russian princess will never meet the same people that I meet, right? The Russian women that I could meet, for example, at church, are women who hate Putin, right? They're women who are against the war. Why? Because why would they come to Spain, right? Or they would be, let's say, a different kind of immigration. They would be, let's say, the daughters of Russian people who came before all of this, right? So they wouldn't be completely Russian. They would be Russians that have become a little bit Spanish, let's say. Now, why am I saying all of this? Because if you treat these concepts in the abstract, you're gonna make mistakes. Okay, so let's keep listening to Nikolai.
Found meanings and consequence, where you fall on a socially constructed color scale for that. By comparison, race is cosmically insignificant, and even on a time scale, insignificant. It tells us almost nothing about who you are other than, hey, this is the heritage that they come from. And
No, nations are tied to your race.
again, race being a oftentimes not useful term in how we define things can often lead people to kind of crazy positions that are not sustainable. And this brings me to my third point. Culture is much more important than race. It is the bedrock of all society, and culture is
I agree, but you cannot separate culture from nationhood from race.
informed primarily by religion, not race. Primarily by religion, not race. Culture is what shapes how we live, how we think, how we raise our families, and how we understand the world. And for centuries, the primary driver and shaper of culture in the world was religion. The Orthodox faith is the leaven that has leavened the cultures of Russia, Greece, the Balkans, the Middle East, and beyond. It gives culture its soul and its purpose. The focus on race is to focus on kind of a shadow, something that people notice, but is not really that important or significant in the broader terms of the word.
Yes, but when we're talking about politics, it definitely comes to the fore.
It often is used as a way to ignore the substance that is culture and the source of that substance, which is faith. Now, because of this confusion, people who put heavy emphasis on race often fall into two extreme camps.
Yeah. I know what you're gonna do. You're gonna compare people who have the same race but a
Let's
different
take two of these
religion.
as a, we're going to use these, Ireland and Georgia, as a very prime example. Okay. The people that are in the camp of infinite importance can be particularly dangerous because it can lead people to frankly sinful or false understandings of what matters in people and how we should perceive the people around us. A lot of white people, and I use white in the generic term because that's how a lot of people understand it, but let's just say ethnically European peoples are drawn to strong racial views because of what they perceive as hypocrisy in the world. The idea that race matters for me, but not thee. This is a reactive posture and very understandable. It leads people to seek justification for their views of defending, quote unquote, their race. They often turn to pseudosciences to defend their position. This, of course, these pseudosciences fundamentally undermine orthodoxy and Christianity. It replaces the truth that we all made in the image of God with a materialistic biological determinism. My position is that race matters insofar that we should be aware of it as a social reality that affects people's lives, but we must not make everything about it. It cannot be the foundation of our identity or community. This brings us directly to the pseudosciences I mentioned earlier. One of these is Darwinianism. In a purely materialistic, atheistic form, is false. It presents a worldview without purpose, without soul, without God, a story of random chance and survival of the fittest. When applied to human societies, it becomes social Darwinism, a philosophy that has been used to justify all kinds of ridiculous ideologies, cruelty, and oppression from different groups. We can use the Rwandan genocide versus, as an example, two groups of people that could not be more alike in terms of looks, in terms of culture, and other aspects, being killing each other. So that is the thing that needs to be understood. Now, this often comes hand in hand with a fascination in IQ sciences. Now, let me be clear. I believe this field is at best a flawed science, and at worst a joke used to prop up prejudice. When people compare IQ, they often ignore inconveniences that might contradict their position on that. First, the entire concept of measuring intelligence with a single number is highly questionable at best. What
It is the only measure we have, and it's the best predictor that we have in terms of social sciences. So, like, if you have to dismiss IQ, then you have to dismiss all of the social sciences.
is being measured? Many cultures value different cognitive skills. The tests themselves are often contain biases, and there is never any consistency often with the tests. For example, some languages will not have concepts for certain things. How is a group of people to be tested about
If your language doesn't have a concept for a certain thing, there's a reason why.
IQ when even their own language is not? Now, some people say, but the tests don't require language, but that is a ridiculous assertion because in
That
order
is
to
true.
understand a concept, one must have it written out in a language that is understandable. How are they supposed to know the rules of the test if they can't even read what the test is about? Now, again, the scientists have attempted to get there, and I think there is some value to IQ science. As I'm not denying the existence of it. I'm saying that it's not useful in the broader scheme of things.
Well, it is useful if you understand how it plays out historically, because that conversation is completely connected to the conversation about colonialism and its effects on the conversation about race right now. So, like, I agree with you, Nikolai, in terms of not making race an idol. I disagree with this, let's say, criticism of IQ because I think it's kind of modernist. And while I agree that IQ is not a salvific measure, we live in a world that is constituted and constructed in part by narratives and by concrete histories in which those narratives exist and have shaped the world and must also shape the world. Because, for example, let's say if hypothetically white people were smarter than black people, that is a justification for colonialism. Why? Because you, as a stronger people, have the duty to steward the weaker peoples, for example, or that could be argued at least in geopolitical terms. So, if the intellectual justification for colonialism is a form of paternalism, where white people have to rule over black people because blacks are not as smart, hypothetically, then differences in IQ really do matter in terms of salvation, because for a white person to abdicate the responsibility would imply, let's say, burying their talents, for example. Like, it would imply not shepherding the weaker the weaker parts. The problem that I see is that people want to have it both ways. They want to be both victims and victors. They want to have the moral high ground and the political cliche of claiming victimhood, and also having the benefits of legitimate rulership and let's say independence. And you cannot have it both ways. So I would say that race is not accidental. It's not arbitrary. It's not let's say unjust. It's not a fake construct. So what I would say is that we don't have to adopt this like milk toast language of like, oh, I'm a race realism or I'm against racism. No, no, no. We should say I am racist, but I am racist in a good way. Like, I understand the differences between races, between peoples, between, because I make distinctions between people, and I treat each person how I think they ought to be treated. And if you don't like the way I treat people, then you have a problem with me, and we would have to sort it out, because you're putting yourself in the place of judging me in the way I conduct my personal relationships, uh, because you're trying to subject me to your, let's say, moral standard of how I should be treating other people. And I would also argue that this is what Christ calls us to do. Like, he commands us to treat foreigners as locals within bounds, without erasing, let's say, the differences between locals and foreigners. He doesn't call for the abolishment of these differences, or for extinguishing preferential treatment of locals completely, right? He's calling you to, let's say, not to be too biased against foreigners, and saying, oh, they can only undermine you, right? But he wouldn't say, oh, make them your rulers, make them your rulers, allow them to rule over you without integrating to your nation, right? That is not Christian. So let's keep listening to Nikolai.
So let's talk about genetics. This leads us to IQ and genetics. Genetics are important, and certain predispositions or perhaps tendencies towards a physical illness or certain passions a group or a nation may tend towards. But the problem with putting too much emphasis on this is obvious. We know that nations that are not massively distinct genetically can have wildly different cultures, economic, and social outcomes. Let's look at Israel and the Canaanites. One could hardly imagine the tribe of Israel or Abraham being very culturally or genetically distinct from the Canaanites. And yet, look at the different outcomes that we see from the Canaanites and the tribe of Israel. They can be more contrasted. Furthermore, we can look at North and South Korea in terms of genetic drift in less than three generations, and we see significant differences in both the physical and lingual differences between the two groups of people, even though genetics, in a theoretical level, are still very, very close together.
Yeah, but this is a form of dialectical thinking which undermines itself by, let's say, trying to idolize one aspect, which is, like, for example, in this case, culture. Even if culture accounted for 90% of the effect of something, and 10% was race, if you were to completely neglect race and give it its due 10%, uh, if you were to do that, you would be undermining your own, let's say, objective. And, like, this is a very simple thing. Like, for example, it's common in, let's say, bodybuilding circles to say stuff like, I don't know, the triceps is 2/3 of the arm, while the biceps is only 1/3, so the triceps is more important. Yeah, but you're also supposed to train the biceps too. Like, if you neglect the biceps, you're gonna have a small arm whether you want it or not, right? It's not about, let's say, like, priorities are not about neglecting what's marginal. They're about knowing how to apportion your attention accordingly.
In fact, one would be able to mix up a South Korean with a Chinese or a Japanese person much easier than they would, say, a North Korean in many ways. So that is the core distinction there. But here's the most crucial point for an Orthodox Christian. Even if we accept that genetics can have significant influence on something like intelligence, one would have to explain why that is relevant to their spiritual life. Why should
Like I said, it's relevant because the stronger party has a duty to the weaker party. Noblesse oblige.
we spend our energy focusing on things that, from their point of view, the people that believe genetics are of utmost importance and are unchanging? Why should we focus on that? If we accept that genetics have a significant influence on something like intelligence, one would have to explain why it's relevant to them.
We should focus on everything at its given, let's say, relevance.
If they can't change it, why would they even focus on it? Should they not focus on things they can have control over?
Well, but that's besides the point, because these things eventually do spill over, like I said before, politically. They spill over because intelligence is not a minor thing. But I don't want to, like, be drawn into the IQ conversation, because I don't think it's the most interesting. I think it has to do, of course, with the very interest of nations to remain nations. So that's why, like, certain concepts like race keep bubbling up, because they're inevitably part of the nationhood conversation.
Our faith calls us to focus on what? From the Orthodox paradigm, it's theosis, on changing and healing the soul, on cultivating the virtues, on struggling against the passions. These
Yeah, but working on your passions does not involve retreating from the world and not acting in the world. Like the whole point of working on your passions is for you to be the body of Christ and to bring heaven on earth. So it's not for you to, let's say, be this sage in on top of a mountain levitating through the grace of God, so that you can completely be filled subjectively with the Spirit of God, but rather that you might do God's will on earth, right? And stuff like ruling over others is part of that commandment. Like, man is supposed to rule the world. Where is that framing in the whole, oh, let's cultivate the virtues by ignoring this aspect of reality? No, no, no. I'm not saying like muddle these things and like put race as an idol, but idolatry goes both ways, right? It's because you completely neglect something or you make it the center of everything.
are the things within our power. And let's look at the numbers. Based on the research of those who champion this field, genetics are generally accepted to account for about 50 to 80% variation of IQ scores. Let's take a generous average of, say, 60 to 70%. So even if we blindly trust IQ tests, which is, again, a huge ask, and I've given you no reason to, let's do a simple thought experiment. If someone has a genetic potential that would result in, let's say, an 80 IQ, which is, by the way, astronomically low, even by the worst standards in the world. Like, you can look at some of the lowest numbers in the world for certain nations and see that that's even low for them. But let's just do 80. But their environment and their own effort can account for 30 to 40%. That is a significant increase. Adding 30% to 80 brings you to 104. A 104 IQ is perfectly modern and average in basically any civilization, firmly in the normal range. The conclusion is inescapable. What we ought to do as Orthodox is focus on the things we can
That's kind of slippery. That's kind of slippery.
change, even if you accept the genetic sciences around it. We should build strong communities, support families, provide excellent education, and most importantly, bring people to a life-giving waters of the church. To obsess over unchanging genetic factors is a spiritual dead end. It's a distraction from the real work of salvation. Genetics, race
Yeah, to obsess is, but to acknowledge this as important isn't.
versus history and orthodoxy. That'll be our part 3 here. Now let's look at the historical record. History doesn't seem to comport with a strict view of race and intermixing. Throughout
Yeah.
all of history, we see different groups conquer and intermarry with wildly different groups from different genetic backgrounds. We can look at the Mongolians and the Asians who flooded across from Mongolia all the way throughout into Eastern Europe and into the Middle East. Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan famously had many wives from many different backgrounds. In fact, there are some estimates to say that he had wives from every race on Earth. For every race and ethnicity he encountered, he'd take the most beautiful women. And what would he do? Marry them, interbreed with them. They didn't seem to have such a hang up on race in that time period. We also know that Roman legions would go and conquer those. From the Native American tribes absorbing captives to Dutch traders in the East Indies to Roman legions who settled across their vast empire from Britain to Syria. Human history is a sort of migration and mixing and cultural exchange. The idea of genetically pure populations is a modern myth, and we also know that there are many issues in America with the Amish. The Amish, being very insular, have very much struggled with being too closely related and not being externally outfacing. We know that in the modern nation state of Israel, they have laws dictating that they must have genetic testing before you can get married because too many people are closely related. This is again what happens to an insular society that really does not marry outside of itself. It's a major issue. And so there's a balance to be had where having quote unquote fresh blood coming into your nation can greatly help it. And these racial categories have always been pretty arbitrary. The Romans often looked down on Germanic and Celtic tribes. In fact, they considered them backwards barbarians, despite them being what we would call of one race. Hitler himself, the main driver of race science, as some people say, from a more race doesn't matter paradigm, which is of course equally ridiculous. He famously made exceptions for Japanese, considering them honorary Aryans, and seeing no issue with German men marrying Japanese women. In fact, there's many historical accounts of that happening. This proves that the lines are not based on science, but political and social convenience. The truth is, nations can develop. We know the Germanic tribes developed rapidly once adopting Orthodoxy and Christianity, and we know that the nation grows closer to God, it becomes increasingly distinct from those around it. The Canaanites would not have been massively genetically different from the tribe of Israel, yet look at the massive divergence in civilizational and spiritual potential between them. The difference was of covenant and faith, not blood. We also see this with Moses having married a woman from Cush, which most modern scholars say would have been of African descent, and not North African, but Sub-Saharan African. This leads to the most profound point that I have. Theosis isn't bound to genetics. Any nation, any people, any individual is capable of spiritual development and becoming a vessel of holiness. Their cultures are purified in the lens of the church. If we are to suggest that theosis is genetically limited, that some groups are simply incapable of developing to the same degree, one would have to argue on some level that they cannot become as holy as others. Some might object and say, well, theosis isn't reliant on intelligence. But on some level, the ability to understand the faith is reliant on that culture's ability to comprehend what is being taught to them. If you claim a genetic intellectual ceiling, it would logically follow that such a group could never fully attain to the faith. This is a blasphemy against the Holy Spirit.
No,
and
no,
it's
no,
very
no,
also
no.
against the universe.
No, 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 no. That is a wrong anthropology. I'm sorry. because the apprehension of noetic insight doesn't correlate
What's called
to discursive power.
of salvation. So part 4 is, can we care about ethnicity? So after all this, is there any place for caring about our people? Yes. As explained earlier, ethnicity is rooted in a shared culture and history, and has a binding effect on society. It helps people cohere and work together to improve their nation. This is natural and a good love for one's own. However, this leads many to label miscegenation or intermarriage as a sin. But this is nowhere in Scripture, when read in its correct context. We have many examples of righteous figures in interethnic marriages, from Moses to Boaz to, in a spiritual sense, Christ himself in the church. There is a crucial distinction to be made here. There is a difference between a nation having policies to encourage cultural stability, perhaps by opposing mass migration, that can be destabilizing, and opposing small subset of individuals who in good faith form a marital bond with someone from another background. One can reasonably oppose cultural or ethnic destruction without dehumanizing mixed couples or their children. Furthermore, most of the problems faced by mixed children tend to be a result of weak cultures that don't demand integration. This is most stark in America, where race
I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case. And let me explain why. And like, I'm gonna catch hate from everyone in this, but like, the reason why uh, those people cannot be forcibly integrated is because they are essentially, by their own history and choice, on the margins. It's like, I, being an Argentinian living in Spain, being a mixed race, let's say descendant of like Hungarians, Spanish, and Armenians, like, I myself, I'm an odd bird. I'm the odd one out. Like, I was the one who chose to make myself the odd one out. So yes, I am more, let's say, predisposed to marry someone who's already in the margins, but I marginalized myself. So it's not a question of whether or not a society is like forcing people to come to the center, but rather, is the person from the outside able to be, let's say, helped along to become part of the center? And the answer to that is a resounding no, because no matter how much you want to make me a Spaniard, or how much you would want to make me a Russian, you cannot do it. I'm already an Argentinian. Maybe my children could be Spanish. My children could be Spanish, yes, but I can't be. I won't be. And the reason is that the amount of effort that it would take is too much. So when let's say, when the ethnic nationalists are saying, I don't want people to come over here because uh, if they come in droves, they won't assimilate culturally. That's right, because when you have a big swath of people who are from a different background establishing their own outposts, their own colonies in another country, they can become their own thing. So your Pakistanis in England, uh, they're not really English. They are English Pakistanis, which is a different thing altogether. So there is no need to assimilate if if there is a big enough number of people who share that same story. And what I would say is, even if you did like go, like in my case, uh, alone, let's say, even though there are a lot of Argentinians here in Spain, like I don't have a relationship with any. Uh, even if I did, let's say, go to a different place and let's say try to relocate, I don't have the capacity to become enculturated, at least not for 20 years. So in that sense, I would say you cannot actually force people to integrate.
is a massive, ever-present cultural stressor. But in cultures with strong, demanding cultural hegemony, these children integrate with far fewer issues. And historically, within 2 to 3 generations.
No, they don't integrate. They partially integrate. And that's okay, because some things will remain in the margins. I don't have to be the president of Spain. I don't have to be the king of Spain.
these families become genetically indistinguishable from the broader population. The problem isn't mixing in itself, it's the lack of a strong unifying culture to integrate into. So, what is the Orthodox path forward? First, the simple reality is that most people, their duty is to develop their own nation and bring Orthodoxy to it. But we're also called to bring Orthodoxy to all nations. Having an entirely insular attitude is simply not sustainable from an Orthodox context. Look at the Russian Empire as a prime example. They catechized and sent missionaries across Siberia, Alaska, Japan, and China, and many of those groups of people would not have been genetically similar to the Russians at all. And yet the Russians had no problem marrying into those groups and forming bonds with them, and even today don't see much of an issue with it. You won't find your average Russian losing.
Yeah. I completely agree with you, but here's a very big caveat. The missionary, he's not from the center already. He's already from the margins. The person who's leaving to do that is not, let's say, it's not from the center.
Over their son or daughter marrying a Yakuts, who by all accounts they consider Russian as well. Second, if one is genuinely concerned about the future of an ethnic group, they should focus on the core issues, advocating for their own people to have more children and limiting destabilizing mass migration. Blaming the small number of people who find love across ethnic lines is inconsistent and doesn't actually solve the demographic problem. It just increases the cultural stressors that come with it, and it makes the issues more pronounced amongst the groups of people. Let's look.
I kind of agree there.
At Georgia and Ireland as two examples. One would reasonably say that a Georgian and Irish person are going to be very different in terms of culture, faith, ethnic background. I mean, you cannot get much more stark than that. And yet, people would say that's totally fine because they're both of the same quote-unquote race. Then we can look at a British United Kingdom and see that they, mixing with, say, a Greek person, are going to have just as many cultural issues as the Irish and the Georgian. And yet again, people consider them of one race. Well, eventually you'll get people that say, well, they're Anglo, and then those people are Greco-Roman, or those people are Slavic, or those people are Baltic. Well, then at this point, your race has become increasingly specific to the point where you're almost just saying ethnicity. So at that point, why not just say that ethnic groups are no longer allowed to intermarry? A Polish person with a Greek person? Nope, not allowed. Only those within Poland can marry Polish people, and maybe Belarusians since they have a shared common history. That's not what we see.
No, it's not about people's opinions. It's about what's normative in terms of what usually happens. Like I said, the center of a nation will remain unchanged. Like about 80% of the people will not mix. That's just the facts of how things are. Whether other people have opinions about it or not, it's irrelevant. To the point that those opinions don't become, let's say, politically powerful.
So we return to the original question. Where do you draw the line? This has been a theme throughout the video. If you oppose miscegenation, what is the boundary? Do we think a Pole and Hungarian is wrong? What about a Georgian and Irish person? Is it too far? What about a Persian and a German? The very fact that there is no clear objective answer reveals the bankruptcy of the entire framework. You can't build a society, a culture, an ideology on a...
Because it's not about an ideology, it's about describing patterns of reality. It's not about normatively saying this is how it should be because of, let's say, divine command, but rather this is how it has always been because of structural reasons having to do with how nations, societies, and cultures develop naturally. The problem is that by saying there shouldn't be any of these structures, you're already pushing society culturally towards liberalism.
framework like this that is too inconsistent, that shifts with the moving of the sands.
For example, there is nepotism in every single society. There is an in-group preference, and to say that there shouldn't be is liberal. The question is, who gets to decide? Of course, I would want, let's say, the Christian standard to rule everywhere, but I cannot blame people for choosing or preferring people that they are closer to in terms of identity. That is the natural thing. And that's why, let's say, there is a gravitational pull towards nationhood and towards even empire. So empires are not this outwardly facing, continually expanding, oppressive force, but rather their cultural gravitational pulls, where, let's say, the elites of the neighboring countries have an affinity towards, let's say, a certain power center, and they want to naturally gravitate towards it, while another part of that very same society wants to oppose it. So that's how geopolitics flows. Okay, it's not about the empire simply conquering the weaker people, but rather it's about a people deciding, hey, these guys are brothers and our friends, and another group of people within that same, let's say, ethnic group saying, no, they're not, they're heretics or whatever, and them having that inner fight, which is how actual wars uh, end up, let's say, developing. It's like, are we going to ignore the fact that a lot of people within Ukraine supported the National Socialist takeover? Are we going to ignore that?
The lines are and always have been arbitrary.
No.
The Orthodox vision is one of unity and truth and diversity in culture. It honors the nations while proclaiming the kingdom is not of this world. Our primary identity is not in our blood, but in the blood of Christ, shed for the life of the world. Let us not be distracted by the world's flawed and divisive categories. Let us instead focus on what is eternal.
The eternal does not erase the temporal.
Our faith, our culture shaped by that faith, and our shared calling to become saints together as one family in God. To wrap up and maybe summarize a few minor points, I want to be clear that this does not mean that you cannot value your culture, that you need to abandon what makes you Italian or someone Romanian.
It kind of does in practice, because it presupposes everything about you valuing your own culture as something inherently arbitrary and kind of quirky. It's like, oh, you kind of prefer, it's a kind of a personal preference, right? Completely subjective and completely arbitrary.
Or someone Ukrainian or someone Russian. It is the opposite. It is saying that those things are made clearer and more prominent when done so under the purview of the church. It is only through the church that these things are given meaning. And thus, it is all the more important that we as a people, that we as Orthodox, go to all nations. When we look at the world, we understand that history is not nearly as set in stone as people like to make it out to be. And it's only in a narrow framework in the Americas that we see the massive amount of issues, as many would like to say. And this is due to historical trends and the fact that America never had a strong cultural identity outside of ideology. Now, people can nitpick about, well, the founders wanted it to be their progeny. But that doesn't change the reality of today. The reality of today is that old stock Americans who founded the country are increasingly going to be a minority within the next 15 to 20 years. They will be at best a plurality. And thus the question of these things, when limited to an American scope, colors the way we view the rest of the world, which, as explained in this video, is much more nuanced and less set in stone than in the American context.
No, I think you're paving over the reality that it is the Enlightenment project, the one that tried to, let's say, remove race or ethnicity from the original question. So, and I see you performatively, unfortunately, I see you performatively continuing in that same kind of liberal reasoning.
So my encouragement to everyone here who's listening to this, do not allow race to become an idol in your life. Race can be important, and you can value your race, you can value your people, you can value the things that you
Why?
find valuable, but it can't come at in expense of the humanity of the person or the humanity of the people.
Yes, I completely agree. But where's the line? Like, where's the line? Where is prioritizing your own people over another people not a statement of, let's say, the inherent value to you about them? So you see how this kind of logic leads to egalitarianism? It's like, no, no, no. You're completely right in prioritizing what's closer to you, right? Within bounds. That's what Christ calls us to do. It's not about erasing differences. It's about trying to, let's say, discern. Okay, if a people's nation is destroyed and they're drifting and need a place to stay, of course, welcome them in. But your son is still your son, and the immigrant is not. Okay, and it's wrong for you to say, oh, you should treat the immigrant better than your own son, which is actually what's happening in most of Europe right now.
You have to view people in the image of God in them. Thus, with that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful day. This is the first long-form video that will be exclusive, and all future videos will be exclusive to members for the first 3 days. and then afterwards it will be available free for everyone. I appreciate everyone's support. If you wish me to maybe clarify a few minor things in this video, maybe you want me to go more in depth on a specific aspect of this video, please let me know down below. Furthermore, I want to make clear that this is a general overview of my view on race. This is not me getting into the details or the specifics or trying to make a debate-worthy presentation. This is meant to be a general overview of my views on these issues, and thus is not meant to be exhaustive. If you want me to give an exhaustive explanation, that would require a debate and much more prep time. This is meant to give you guys an overview of why I do not value race in the same way that I value other aspects of reality. With that being said, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. God bless, and make sure that you guys focus that on which you can actually affect. Glory to God.
Hello, hello, listener. Good to see you. So, I mean, I think that I think that Nikolai is very good faith. He's a good person. He also has a mixed race child. Like his wife is Korean, and he's also not like completely white. So, like, I understand his position. I understand his, let's say, um, I understand. Yeah, good to see you too. So I understand the question that he's posing himself in terms of like, well, I left America and I came here to Korea, and like I've started this life, and like where am I? Like when he hears a lot of people have this like super strong racialist rhetoric, I understand why he is concerned not only for their salvation but also for his standing. It's like, will he be looked down upon simply because he has a little bit of Native American blood and his child has is half American, half Korean? It's like, I think it's completely legitimate, and I think a lot of his arguments have merit when you're speaking against Neanderthals, but like the philosophical foundations of those arguments are not as solid. Yeah, no, I know. But it's important to speak about the philosophical underpinnings of these ideas, because otherwise, like, we're lost in a morass of like very poorly constructed concepts, and we don't get to shine as orthodox if we do not, let's say, interact with reality as it plays out. It's like, there are, for example, national socialists in my church, right? There are communists, there are classical liberals, and none of those positions are fully orthodox. So we need to be able to speak about ideology without falling into ideology, and to be able to, let's say, articulate the mind of the church in a language that is understandable to people who are, let's say, coming from a more liberal background, because that's the water we swim in, whether we want to or not. So anyway, thank you for watching, and God bless anyone who's willing to take the stand on these controversial topics like you. Hello, listener. I think that you're based. I love your music, and let's keep having these conversations, because they affirm us in who we are, and they give testimony to those outside of Orthodoxy. So God bless everyone.